M2 light tank. This interwar light tank traced its origins to the T2 prototype, built at the Rock Island Arsenal in 1934. The T2 borrowed its leaf spring suspension from the British Vickers 6-ton tank, but this was soon replaced by the superior vertical volant-to-spring suspension system in the T2E1. The first production model, the M2A1, entered service in 1935 with just 10 units built, featuring a single turret armed with a .50 caliber Browning M2 machine gun. The Army then shifted to a twin turret layout, producing 239 M2A2s between 1936 and 37. Troops nicknamed this version the Mae West after the famous actress, thanks to its distinctive dual-turret silhouette. 72 improved M2A3s followed in 1938 with thicker armor and revised suspension. The Spanish Civil War changed everything. Observers concluded that machine guns alone were not enough, and the M2A4 emerged in 1940 with a 37mm M5 gun in a single traversing turret, 1 inch of armor, and 5.30 caliber machine guns scattered across the hull and sponsons. 375 M2A4s rolled off the American car and foundry production line through 1941. The M2A4 saw its only real combat with the Marine Corps at Guadalcanal in 1942, where a company of the 1st Tank Battalion deployed them alongside M3 Stuarts. They provided mobile fire support against Japanese bunkers using canister shot and fought in pairs to cover each other against infantry armed with satchel charges. 36 M2A4s were also shipped to Britain under Lend-Lease. By then, the M2 was already obsolete, but its vertical volant suspension, powertrain layout, and overall design directly shaped the M3 Stuart that replaced it. M2 medium tank. This medium tank represented America's first serious attempt at a modern medium-weight combat vehicle. Developed at Rock Island Arsenal and entering production in 1939, the M2 medium was powered by a 350 horsepower Wright R 975 radial engine originally designed for aircraft. It weighed roughly 19 tons and carried a 37mm M3 gun in a small revolving turret perched atop a tall superstructure. What made the M2 truly distinctive was its staggering number of machine guns. 4.30 caliber Brownings sat in hull sponsons. 2 more were fixed in the glacis plate and fired by the driver. A coaxial gun rode alongside the 37mm, and 2 additional .30 caliber weapons could be pinel mounted on the turret for anti-aircraft use, bringing the potential total to 9. The hull even featured bullet deflector plates over the rear fenders, designed so that when the tank straddled a trench, the sponson guns could ricochet rounds downward into the enemy positions below. In practice, both the sponson guns and the deflector plates proved useless. Only 18 M2s were completed before the slightly improved M2A1 replaced it, featuring a larger turret borrowed from the M3 light tank with a 2-inch gun mantlet. 94 M2A1s were built through August of 1941, bringing total production to just 112. Chrysler had originally been contracted to build 1,000 M2 mediums at the new Detroit Arsenal tank plant. But the fall of France in 1940 made the design's shortcomings painfully obvious. The contract was revised within 2 weeks before a single tank left the line, switching production to the M3 Lee instead. The M2 medium never saw overseas combat and served exclusively as a training vehicle. Yet its suspension, tracks, and powertrain carried forward into the M3 Lee, the M4 Sherman, and an entire generation of American armor. Marmon Harrington, CTLS. This series of light tanks and tankettes came from an unlikely source. Marmon Harrington was an Indiana-based company specializing in commercial trucks and all-terrain vehicles, not military armor. In the mid-1930s, the Marine Corps wanted a light amphibious tank for ship-to-shore operations, and Marmon Harrington answered with the CTL-3 in 1936. It was a small, turretless tankette with a crew of 2, weighing just 4.7 tons and protected by only half an inch of armor. 3.30 caliber machine guns were mounted in the hull front. A Hercules 6-cylinder engine producing 120 horsepower pushed it to about 30 miles per hour. The Marines ultimately rejected the CTL-3 for being unreliable and inferior to the M2A4 light tank. But overseas buyers came calling. The Royal Netherlands East Indies Army desperately needed tanks for its colonial forces and turned to Marmon Harrington as the only commercial tank producer available. This led to the CTLS-4 TAC and CTLS-4 TAY, improved variants with a small offset turret carrying a .30 caliber machine gun and armor doubled to 1 inch. The turret sat on the right side in the 4 TAC and the left in the 4 TAY, each designed to operate in pairs to compensate for their limited traverse of 270 degrees. Around 875 CTLS variants were produced in total. The Dutch order arrived far too late. Only a handful reached Java before the Japanese invasion in early 1942, and those that did fight were quickly overwhelmed. 149 were diverted to Australia for training. 600 were allocated to China under Lend-Lease, but China rejected them after already receiving superior M2A4s and Stuarts. The U.S. Army inherited 240 unwanted tanks and shipped some to Alaska for the Aleutian Islands campaign, where they were designated the light tank T-14 and T-16. They were declared obsolete by 1943. While long considered lost to history, a few surviving examples can still be found in museums in the United States and the Netherlands. LVTA series. These amphibious fire support vehicles, known as AMTanks, evolved from a civilian swamp rescue craft. In 1935, engineer Donald Roebling designed the Alligator for navigating the Florida Everglades, and the Marine Corps recognized its potential for amphibious warfare. The basic landing vehicle tracked was a cargo carrier, but early Pacific operations at Tarawa in November of 1943 revealed a critical gap. Standard LVTs armed only with .50 caliber machine guns could not deal with Japanese bunkers and fortified positions. Marines needed heavy firepower in the water and on the beach before conventional tanks could land. The LVTA-1 was the answer. Built on the LVT-2 Water Buffalo hull by the Food Machinery Corporation, it mounted a modified M5A1 turret nearly identical to the M3 Stuarts, carrying a 37mm M6 gun with a coaxial .30 caliber machine gun. Two rear-mounted Browning M1919, four machine guns provided additional coverage. The front hull carried up to 2 inches of armor, and the vehicle could reach 25 miles per hour on land and 6.5 miles per hour in water. 509 were built. They first saw action in the Marshall Islands, where they preceded infantry waves and fired from the water as they approached the beaches. But the 37mm proved inadequate against hardened Japanese defenses. The LVTA-4 replaced it in 1944, swapping the Stuart turret for the open-top turret of the M8 Scott howitzer motor carriage with its 75mm M2 howitzer. This gave AMTanks genuine bunker-busting capability, though the low-velocity howitzer sacrificed the anti-armor punch of the 37mm, and the open-top turret left the crew exposed to artillery and infantry attack. 1,890 were produced, and they proved devastating at Saipan, Leyte, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. The final wartime variant, the LVTA-5, added a power-operated turret with a gyro-stabilized howitzer for improved accuracy on the move. 269 were built before the war ended, and they went on to serve in Korea with the Marines. Sherman flame tanks. These weapons were born from desperation in the Pacific. When the United States entered the war, it had no mechanized flame-throwing capability whatsoever. The concept reportedly originated with an officer of the 754th Tank Battalion in New Caledonia, who improvised a flamethrower mount on an M3 Stuart. Early attempts were crude, but the idea proved effective at Bougainville, and further development passed to the Army Chemical Warfare Service at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. There, the Army turned to the Navy's construction battalions for help. Seabees of the 117th Naval Construction Battalion, led by Colonel Grunfeld Unmacht, became the primary builders of American flame tanks. They started small, converting 8 M4A3 Shermans for Iwo Jima with CBH-1 and CBH-2 flamethrower systems. These early models replaced the bow machine gun with a flame projector operating at 300 pounds per square inch, capable of throwing fire anywhere from 60 to over 100 yards depending on fuel mixture and conditions, requiring 150 pounds of welding rod and 1,100 electrical connections per conversion. For Okinawa, the entire 713th Tank Battalion converted to flame tanks. The Seabees supervised the conversion of 54 Shermans fitted with Ronson flamethrowers. The 713th's performance was so valued that their flame tanks received AAA procurement priority, the same classification given to the B-29 bomber and the atomic bomb. The immense casualties being taken by infantry at Iwo Jima and Okinawa made flame tanks the single most requested weapon by ground commanders. The most refined variant was the POA-CWS-H5, predominantly built on M4A3 hulls with 105mm guns and HVSS suspension. In total, the Seabees produced 354 flame tanks across 11 different models. The 713th Tank Battalion went through 200,000 gallons of fuel on Okinawa alone and earned a Presidential Unit Citation for its actions. The Marine Corps retained a platoon of CWSPO AH-5s after the war, and 9 of them, nicknamed the Flame Dragons, landed at Incheon in 1950 as the only American mechanized flame unit in Korea. T-28 Super Heavy Tank. This near 100-ton prototype was the heaviest armored vehicle ever developed by the United States. Conceived in late 1943, the T-28 was designed specifically to breach the fortifications of Germany's Siegfried Line using brute force and near-impenetrable armor. The 105mm T-5E1 high-velocity gun was selected for its proven ability to reduce heavy concrete fortifications, delivering rounds at a muzzle velocity of 3,700 feet per second. Frontal armor reached a staggering 12 inches thick enough to defeat the German 88mm at combat ranges. The T-28 had no conventional turret. Its gun sat in a ball-shaped mantlet set into the front of a low-profile casemate hull, with traverse limited to 10 degrees right and 11 degrees left. A single .50 caliber Browning M2 machine gun mounted above the commander's hatch was the only secondary weapon. The vehicle was powered by a Ford GAF V8 gasoline engine, producing just 500 horsepower, giving a top speed of only 8 miles per hour, slower than a person can jog, and a range of 100 miles on roads. To distribute its 95-ton combat weight, the T-28 used 4 sets of tracks instead of 2, each 12.9 inches wide. The outer pair were essentially bolt-on track assemblies that widened the vehicle's footprint like armored pontoons, and they could be detached in about 2 hours for rail transport and towed behind the vehicle. Built by the Pacific Car and Foundry Company in Seattle, only 2 prototypes were completed out of 25 originally planned. By the time they reached testing in late 1945, the Siegfried Line had already fallen. The vehicle's classification caused repeated confusion. Initially designated heavy tank T-28, it was renamed 105mm gun motor carriage T-95 in 1945 because it lacked a turret, then redesignated super heavy tank T-28 in 1946 because its armor was far too heavy for a self-propelled gun. One prototype was destroyed by an engine fire during trials at Yuma Proving Ground and scrapped. The other vanished for nearly 3 decades before being discovered abandoned in a field at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, in 1974. It now sits on display at Fort Benning, Georgia, the sole surviving example of America's most extreme armored experiment. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and drop a comment. See you on the next one.